I think the first time I knew that God was calling me to Uganda was 7 years ago on my first trip to Uganda. I just remember feeling a burden for the people and the culture like I never had felt before. I learned about a specific people group in Uganda called the Karamojong tribe. And when I learned about them, I don't really know what it was about them. I just remember writing them down in my journal and praying for them and coming home and telling my best friend that one day I think I'm gonna work with them long term. And that passion continued to grow. And then 7 years later, I got a call from an IMB missionary asking if I could work with that people group. And I hadn't thought about them for a few years by then. And I just remember feeling total peace and remembering when God had first laid that specific tribe on my heart. Because there's over 16,000 people groups, but that was just one that God laid in my heart. And then to get that call from that missionary was just incredible. I would say what really kept calling me back was the relationships I made there. So I made deep connections with certain Ugandans there, and those relationships kind of drew me to the next trip. And my 3 months there, I went back after that 3 months for a year with the same exact people. So the more time I spent with them, the more my love grew for them, and the more I recognized just the need for discipleship there. And I learned also so much about the way that they worship God and the faith that they had. I think that's one of the biggest things. One of my favorite verses in Thessalonians, it talks about how Paul not only shared the gospel with them, but he also shared his very life with them. And I think that's something that sticks out to me about Uganda. Like, you really get to do life with the people there and they become your family. I think one of the biggest things I learned from my relationships in Uganda so far is just the way they rely on God and the faith they have for their daily needs. Obviously, everyone needs God and we need to be dependent on God, but there they have to rely on God for their daily bread. Like, are my kids gonna go to school? Are my kids gonna have food tonight? Versus here, we oftentimes don't have to think about those things. So there you just see this continual reliance on God, prayerfulness, and this hope for eternity, because that is truly what their hope is in. It's not in this life. So a lot of times I get the question, why would you go to Uganda when there's so much need in America? And I totally agree. There's a lot of need in America, and there's a lot of need all over the world. I can say specifically for the Karamojong tribe, there's only about 3% of the 300,000 people are Christians, and of those Christians, very little of them are practicing. As a Christian, I think we are all called to make disciples wherever we are. As I was waiting in America, my call was to make disciples here, and God has called me overseas for a period of time, right now 2 years. Who knows what that will mean in the future, but I think if all of us as Christians did our part, the gospel would go out and be heard in many more places than it is now. I don't think there's an answer to why God's called me to Uganda specifically. I just know that He has, and that I want to be faithful to where He asked me to be and intentional where He asked me to go. And I think if all Christians were purposeful and intentional in their own neighborhoods and obedient when God asked them to go, then the gospel would advance. I would say the biggest way that Calvary can be praying for me would just pray that I would be faithful to spend alone time with Christ, and that all of my outpouring would be from a place of dependence on the Spirit. I would also say be praying for those hearts of the people to be softened, because in the end, God is the one who saves and changes hearts.